Welcome to the PULSEcast. I'm your host, Molk. We're back for another big episode. Thank you for joining us. We'll start by acknowledging the Indigenous owners, the original people of this land that we're recording on, the Barramadigal people of the Darug Nation. Sovereignty was never ceded, and we seek to grow better relationships with their elders past and present. We are here to talk all about young adult ministry this week. I've got welcome to the PULSEcast. Three great guests that launch us into this. We've got Matt Anslow, and we'll hear more about what Matt does in a second. We've got Paul Simpson in the same way, and Gabi Cadenhead. Hello, friends.
Hi. Hello there.
It's so great that you can join us. Now, I know what you do, but not everybody else does, so I'll start with the very easy question. Matt, what do you do?
What do I do? Well, I, at the moment, work for the Uniting Church Synod of New South Wales and the ACT.
Oh, hang on, that's us.
That's us. We're on the same team. But I work as the educator for lay ministry. So I spend my time doing all sorts of education work with basically anyone who is in leadership but is not an ordained person in the Uniting Church.
Right.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Thank you.
It's good to be here.
Sure. You say that now. Thank you. Paul, what do you do?
Hi, I'm Paul. So I'm a minister, and I am in placement at a place called Pittwater Uniting Church on the sunny shores of the northern beaches of Sydney. So that's a great thing. And
Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's right. And I get to spend time working with youth, young peoples, middle-aged peoples, old peoples, kind of all the peoples.
You're on the wrong podcast. No, that's great. And that gives us a good context, because I've got the reason why I've drawn everyone together, and we'll hear from Gabi in a second, is because you all bring something really unique to young adult ministry, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Gabi, hello, what do you do?
Hi, I'm a mission worker for Christian Students Uniting, which when I say that and people have zero context, I have no idea what that means.
Sure.
But essentially there's kind of chaplains placed at the universities across Sydney, and I work at the University of Sydney as a lay person who is only just not a student and kind of still looks like one.
Congratulations, by the way.
And so I'm kind of assisting the chaplain. I'm kind of the bridge between being a student and being out in the world.
Yes.
I assist in running Bible studies, in pastoral care, and all those sorts of fun things.
Wow. Well, the full-time jobs, friends, all three of you. That takes a lot of effort. So if we're here to talk about young adult ministry, without sort of pointing out the obvious in the room, Gabi is a young adult. The rest of us are not.
What point are you trying to make here, Molk?
Saying that we're old. Welcome to the Shorthead Men's podcast, including Gabi, who's come into this as well.
No argument there, I suppose.
So why then, or what does it mean, like, in your history, what does young adult ministry look like? And I'll start with Gabi, because as a young adult, you're both the target of this sort of realm of ministry, and yet you're engaged in it yourself as a peer. What does young adult ministry look like for you, both as a recipient and, someone that is someone that's doing it?
Yeah. I walked into the University of Sydney in 2016 as a first-year student, and during O Week walked up to the CSU stall.
Yep.
Because I knew that was going to be a place that felt like home when I just moved out of home.
Yeah.
And I spent 5 wonderful years as a student connecting with that group, and I found it to be a really formational place, a place that takes the theological questions of young people seriously, that really wants to support them in exploring their faith and asking lots of questions, and building community with other people who are also deeply interested in faith and how it relates not just to Sundays but our whole lives. And particularly when you're studying in theory for a career, then that's going to be a question that's on your mind a lot. And so then I graduated and I didn't want to leave is the short answer. But I've now been a mission worker for 2 years, and it's really wonderful to see ministry with these young adults from the other side, to be able to lead Bible studies myself and respond to people's questions and offer them, maybe some slightly different theological resources than they might have accessed otherwise, and because each person brings a different perspective to that, right? And I think it's wonderful that we've got multiple perspectives involved in young adult ministry in our space of tertiary ministry.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's about this place has so formed me that I want to be involved in forming other people.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah.
I would assume that you're finding some life and energy in that because you've stuck with it for 2 years now. Apart from, as you talked about, a formational experience for you, and we acknowledge that the young adult experience is broad. Not everyone goes to uni. Others find other ways through it. However, it is a high concentration of young adults fresh out of high school, most of them ready to take on the world and having their minds blown by all sorts of different and new ideas and experiences and exposures that they may not have had in their stuff.
Yeah.
What does it look like for you now as a former student working in mission with people who are your age and not much younger?
Sorry, can you say that question
Sure.
again?
What does it look like for you, or what's your experience now working with people your age in ministry who are your age and not much younger that are asking some of the questions that maybe you asked or are asking the same kind of bigness questions?
Yeah. It's really interesting to watch new students join us over the last couple of years. We got a bit small during COVID, but over the last year or so, we've had some newbies join us, and I'm a little bit scared realising how much older than them I am now. But
You're ancient,
It only
Gabi.
gets worse.
Yeah.
Trust me, Gabi.
Make this end of the table, gosh.
But it's really wonderful to, for example, the other day I led a Bible study. We've been going through the parables and looking at them from a theological lens and also a creative lens, because that's some particular gifts that I bring to this role.
Yes.
And I had kind of brought in some, poems by a trans poet from the UK, and we kind of had a conversation about how the parable relates to being queer affirming. And there's this 18-year-old who's just joined our group who has never thought about whether they affirmed queer people or not before, and was just so open to every single idea that was put on the table.
Great.
So the idea that me just showing up in that role as my full self enables people to explore issues that they just haven't had the space for before is really moving.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. That's all of the joy and vibrancy and vitalness of ministry with young adults, right? To be in that space, because young adults particularly can articulate their questions better than I can, hopefully. I'm not doing super great right now, but they're and particularly in a tertiary context, in a place where they are absolutely encouraged to just ask questions, to just be in a place and question everything, to steal the name of a TV show. Thanks, Gabi. Paul, you've been engaged in ministry with young people in a couple of different contexts. How does it work for you now, and how does what you did before fill some of those gaps or alter or even change that?
Yeah, so I've been doing in that kind of youth, young adult space for probably about 20-ish years. And I always think of them together because there is so much overlap in both directions. Youth kind of get to that stage when you think of them more as young adults, and then young adults get to that stage when sometimes you think, I actually need to treat you more like a youth because you're not quite there yet, and we're still, we're still somewhere figuring it out in that space. It's constantly evolving for me as someone involved in it, because I keep learning and I keep finding new things and different ways with which to engage with youth, young adults in that space. In my setting, it's been a pretty kind of traditional youth ministry church setting, and evening service, life groups, Bible studies, and those sorts of things. I often talk about how I gave up Friday nights for 2 decades. I'm still doing it, actually. But I don't look back and go, man, I wish I'd gone to the pub more. I wish I hadn't spent those Friday nights with young people. And, I look back on it as really some of the best investment of my time and my energy for my own personal faith, but also for my ministry that I could have. That's me kind of dancing around the question without really answering it.
In a congregational setting, as opposed to a tertiary setting where Gabi lands, in a congregational setting, some congregations have more than a handful, a reasonable number, and where you're at Pittwater fits that capacity. We've got a pretty reasonable young adult cohort there. Some congregations have a handful.
And majority have?
A lot have not many. I'm going to be generous.
That's nice way of saying it. Yeah.
Not heaps. Like,
number
is there a secret sauce?
approaching 0 or around 0?
Between 0 and 0. Is there a secret sauce to that? Like, why does, as the example, why does Pittwater have a young adult cohort like it does, but, Flubadub Uniting Church doesn't?
How ranty do you want me to be?
Rant.
On a scale of 0 to 10.
Not
Like
ranting gives us nothing to share on socials.
He needs that content.
Yeah.
Okay. What to say about Pittwater? So for those who don't know, Pittwater was 3 churches in the late 90s that came together, not because they had to, not because they were forced to financially and they couldn't afford a minister, but because they had a vision.
Wow.
They had a vision for something. So it was an amalgamation of vision as opposed to necessity.
Yep.
We see a lot of amalgamations in the Uniting Church at the moment. And for anyone who's listening to this, I'm sure they know exactly what I'm talking about.
And that's a whole other podcast conversation we can have as well,
They're
right?
probably in an amalgamation because there's a good chance that that's the case. But this one was made not because they needed to, but because they had a vision for what could be. And their vision was around vibrant music ministry, vibrant community ministry, vibrant children's, youth, young adults ministry. Right. And they built a space that reflects that vision. The space at Pittwater, because they had 3 buildings that they sold and they made one big site, has a full sports and rec centre. It's got youth spaces. It's got great music. It's set up for young people. Sure. Because that was the vision. So that was that's the first step of why there is that today. But also I would say that Pittwater over the years was intentional about staying current and modern and relevant to young people. So they were intentional about, and I really have to take my hat off to the oldies because a lot of them along the way said, all right, we don't need the hymns every Sunday. And a lot of them along the way, they said, you know what? It's actually better for there to be young families and young people in our congregation than there is for us just to have the sort of service that we prefer. Yep. And then there's other places for them to enjoy that. But I often look at them and I think to myself, when I'm an old person, that's what I've got to do. I've got to be like an old person that doesn't just sit up the back and be like, oh, why can't we just play Hillsong? What's with this new techno trance worship music that all the kids are into these days?
But that does sound awful.
I just want us to play Oceans. Can we not just play Oceans every week?
Paul, the power of your love, please.
Well, that's perhaps even a bit before me, Molk. I don't want to date anyone in this room. But
I know I'm old. It's fine.
So there's been a vision that has been lived out for the last 3 decades.
Wow.
So I think sometimes, churches hit the emergency button and they go, oh, we've got to do something today. And there's a part of me who said, well, you should have done something 20 years ago. And that doesn't help per se. Perhaps it's just something that needs to be acknowledged. Yeah. That for churches to have ministry that is really intergenerational and really covers a wide spectrum of people, that's something that needs to be worked at for a long time. And it's not just to click the fingers and we need to just, hire the right person for the right job and then the problem will be solved.
Pied Piper it.
Yeah. If you build it, they'll come. That's not the mentality. It's actually, it's a culture from the congregation that kind of needs to be built from the oldies in the pews. That they need to get on board with wanting there to be young people, young families, young adults, youth in their congregations, and from that want, actually making the appropriate sacrifices and making the appropriate decisions they need to for that to actually be a reality.
That
was only a 5
me.
on the rantometer.
No.
That wasn't as full ranty.
Well,
there's more rant.
Trust me, I want to pick
there
up.
was no high-pitched screams.
Yeah.
No, I want to pick up on this notion that, when's the best time to plant a forest 30 years ago? When's the second best time right now? Like, I want to pick up on that in a second. But you open up so many doors around, this nature of what does a congregational life look like where we want to prioritise ministry with young people? That's my personal horse that I'll get on at any time. But please, thank you for that. We'll come back to that as a conversation together. Matt, why have I dragged you into this? What's your background with young adult ministry?
Yeah, that is a good question. I'm not Well, we'll see.
Please.
So
Spoilers, I know. I'm asking you to tell me.
in terms of like formal roles, that's probably where you're thinking.
Yes.
So at one point, I was a young adults pastor in a church in my sort of early to mid-20s, and then made the switch over to being the National Young Adults Coordinator for what is now Tier Fund. It was at this time Tier Australia. And did that for a little while, and then have continued to do that kind of work in various capacities, and have worked with young adults in a range of sort of non-formal settings. So
Yes.
I was very involved with Love Makes a Way when that was a thing, and
Yep.
that was not just young adults, but there was a high concentration of young adults
Sure.
doing refugee activism. So a lot of training of young adults and that kind of thing. And then
Yep.
eventually I ended up at Morling College, the Baptist College in New South Wales, ACT, running their Plunge program, which was their 1 year discipleship, so-called gap year. We didn't think of it like that,
Yeah.
but a gap year type program. And I tended to think of that as a 1 year radicalisation program. So that's the kind of things that I've done. Yeah.
Great. Why should we bother? Friends, honestly, when we talk about young adults, and at least in a Pulse context, we're talking you've left high school up until about the age of 30-ish. Now, if I think back in the day for my parents, and I'm nearly 50, they were married by the time they were 22-ish, 23-ish, and popping me out not long after. They had a mortgage on the way. They were doing all of that sort of stuff. And that, times have changed, spoilers. That's not the situation for most people, though we do
Not
find,
the norm.
particularly where there are young adults connected to church, that marriage still stays in that 20s kind of zone. Not as a rule, but compared to outside the church, where maybe, we'll think about it later, or we'll, I'll say shack up together, but go with me on that.
After the third kid, we'll think,
maybe we should do something.
Should we commit?
Should we formalise this? Whatever it is. But, in that situation, we talk in that kind of range. And ostensibly, the law says once you turn 18, you're an adult. You are responsible for yourself. You have to vote. You've got all sorts of things that you need to do and fill out and all forms and things. So why is ministry with them, we talk about young adult ministry specifically, important when they could just sit in the pew like every other adult and just do their stuff? I broke the panel. No one knows.
No, I've got plenty, but it depends on the rant.
Start.
How much rant?
You start, and I'm sure
okay.
Gabby and Matt can.
Perhaps you might be familiar with McCrindle statistics. Heard that name before? For those who don't know, it's an organisation that's kind of run by Christians, but it's not a Christian organisation. They work in the secular world, doing statistical analysis for businesses, for groups, for whatever. Lovely people. They've done some of their statistical analysis around faith, church, all that kind of stuff.
Great.
Really interesting. Google it. McCrindle statistics. And they have found that 90% of all people come to faith before the age of 21.
Wow.
So I'm no mathematician, but 90% is a really high percentage. Like, it's almost all of them.
Seems big.
Yeah. Now, this is hypothetical, Molk. If we were smart, hypothetically speaking,
We, the people in this room?
just the broader church,
Definitely hypothetical.
hypothetically, if that is true, is that not the most important statistic that the church has ever heard? Because I think it is. And if it was true, and if we were smart, would we not then aim 90% of all of our resources for growth towards those under the age of 21? Because statistically, anyone after the age of 21, there's only like a 10% chance comparatively that they're going to be coming to faith in those years.
But Paul, if we focus all of our, or 90% of our efforts on, these people in the under 21, early 20s kind of age group, I mean, they're not going to keep the church afloat because they're not giving the church any money.
It's a long game, Molk. One day they will have money.
Really?
Well, depending on the mortgage they get to say, yeah. It depends on a lot of things.
Thanks for the reminder.
Oh, there'll be a lot of that.
Yeah. No, well, that's true, right? It's it doesn't have an immediate, perhaps, return in that sense of self-supporting. You know, we often talk about self-supporting ministries. It doesn't have that immediate return, but the long-term strategic return is endless, is it not? And the other thing about the importance of young adult ministry is that young adults are some of the most active ministry agents in the church, bar none. Bar none. The retirees are the other ones. But they're doing more of the nuts and bolts.
So, generally. The amount of disposable time, quote unquote, that you have at that age is unprecedented. or it's not repeated for a long time in your life. That's
they're the ones in our music ministry. They're the ones in our youth ministry. They're the ones in our kids ministry.
Yeah.
They're the ones when we're getting a...
Tech ministry.
Yeah, when we're getting a group to talk about the website, we're getting them. When we're getting a group to talk about social media, it's the young adults.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, they are just so active on so many levels.
I was just going to say, it's not just in terms of coming to faith as well. It's the fact that we, over the last maybe 70 or 80 years, we have developed this thing called adolescence, which didn't really exist prior to that as a life stage. It's come about for a variety of reasons, which I won't bore the listeners with, but we have this thing called adolescence, and it involves a monumental set of stages in like brain development, in maturation and that kind of thing. Young adults are still going through that. The brain continues to develop until the age of, the last I checked was 25. It might even be beyond that now, because brain development changes depending on our environment, our culture changes, our society. And so we now have, whereas brain development once would have finished up by about 18, it now continues till 25.
I don't think I've matured yet.
Yeah, well, you're a special case, but we that's the situation we find ourselves in as a society, with up till 25 being, a period of continued maturation.
Yes.
And so that stage is really formative for people. So not just in terms of coming to faith, but in terms of being able to grow and make certain decisions and put certain habits into place that will probably stay with you for the entirety of one's life.
Yeah.
That is the time to do it, because the brain is forming, the body is forming. And so young adulthood is such a crucial time for people making decisions about who do I want to be? Who am I?
Yeah.
We're still asking those questions. I mean, even into adulthood, but especially at that age, right? Who am I? What kind of life do I want to live? What kind of habits do I want to set in place? What do I think is important? What kind of vocation, both paid and otherwise, do I want to have? Those are all big, formative questions that are happening, especially in a concentrated way, during that time period in our society. Once people have emerged out of what we might call middle adolescence, sort of that 15 to 18-year-old range, that 18 to 25 is that core concentrated period of all those kinds of questions. And if the church is not stepping in and being able to say, we're going to help you, not in a controlling way, but we're going to help you to explore those questions and work out who you are as a person, how you fit into this world, how you see the world. Somebody else is going to do it. And the fact is that these are American stats. There is no Australian research that I'm aware of. But like Lifeway has done some research that shows that people who enter university, about 66% of them will not finish university as a Christian if they started as a Christian. Barna did similar research and had about 64%. But it's about
say the same, right?
Right. It's about 2/3. Now, there's all sorts of factors involved with that. We don't know exactly what's going on, but let's assume it's 50%, right?
Even then, right? Yeah.
Half of young people who go to university come out not Christian. Why? Well, probably because often they've been trained in ways of thinking that just don't stand up to scrutiny. They just don't stand. And so, Gabi's talking about all these people come to CSU with questions that they've never been able to ask before, they've never thought about. Thankfully, CSU exists to help them explore it, because somebody needs to do that work.
Well, it also means they're not asking those questions into the void and no answers coming back.
Yeah.
Or Googling and who knows what happens then.
Yeah.
Bless us, right? So good. Google told me that I'm agnostic Unitarian. I want to, I guess picking up on what Matt said, Gabi, you're at the coalface. What a glorious phrase. Of that ministry. You're engaged in that. As much as anything else, you're also actively involved in your home congregation, which has again, like Pittwater, a sizable young adult community that is a part of it. I mean, in that context, given your legitimately extensive experience engaged in ministry with young adults, there will be people listening that go, we don't know where to start. How do we engage in this? What does it look like? Do we just put them on our committees? Is that how we get young people involved in our church or engaged even in the discipleship conversation? Where can people think about stepping into this?
As you've mentioned, I'm really lucky that I have stepped into these spaces where there are existing young adult ministries. There is existing formation that I've benefited from. So I've actually rarely been at the start of things. I was, in my previous life during high school, part of a very small youth group that kind of collapsed once I left because as the minister's kid, you're kind of the linchpin. It's true.
Yeah.
But where do you start? First of all, I want to answer the why bother question.
Please.
Which is not a question I've ever asked because it doesn't feel like a question that needs to be asked. Because young people are part of the body of Christ, whether they're in your pews or not. We're here and we've got those big questions that Matt was talking about, and we want to have a safe space where we can explore those. And so we're kind of waiting for you. But in terms of where do you start, the kind of model at Leichhardt Uniting Church is the congregation that I'm a part of, and the kind of young adult ministry there is largely because of the relationship with Christian Students Uniting and because there is next door a student house called Epworth House. Those three things are core to how we do ministry, because if you acknowledge the kind of economic realities of being a young person and a student at the moment, having an affordable place to live is huge. And if you build into that a sense of community when people are moving out of home for the first time and don't know where they belong, and then you tie that to a worshipping community, there is so much life that can come from that. And I am an ex-resident of Epworth House, so this is blatant advertisement.
The churches right now is like providing a place for young adults to live. Like how crazy is that to say about society, right? But also,
but it's a way to support.
Totally.
It's a way to support young adults where they're at.
Leichhardt do it right. Roseville have got a similar kind of young adult house available. The benefit straight up, the benefit straight up to Leichhardt is that it's like a bus ride, short bus ride to most universities central to Sydney. So especially if you're coming from out of the Sydney Basin, but even if you're not, it is close, it is affordable, as you mentioned. There's all of those sorts of things that build into it. And that's just a part of it, right? And I'm really heartened that in this conversation so far, apart from my stupid, inference in the question, we didn't say, how do we get involved in young adult ministry? We just get them onto our church council. We just get them into our committees. Now, there may be young people, I'm sure, that have gifts, skills and graces that would actually help us benefit, grow us, do those sorts of things. That's not to discount it. It's as much as anything acknowledging that we have a whole group of wonderful saints that have continued to serve and often find themselves in a place where it is just us. And when a young adult pops up in their life, because they're mobile, independent, they've got extra time compared to a person that's got a full-time job, if you follow my mechanism, they can be engaged in that stuff easily. So, we get them involved in that. It'll save us having to do it. And I think that speaks, Paul, to tease out, given this is really our last question, that intergenerational nature of church where ultimately it takes people who are in an older position than young adults to say, we are going to focus our ministry efforts as a group, as a congregation, on young people and provide space, like Gabi's talking about. We're going to provide opportunity, like Matt's talking about, to explore questions and engage in those sorts of things. That seems to me to be both really selfless and somewhat antithetical to the way that some congregations see their ministry engagement. How do we address that?
Well, for me, it's like do we see our church as family? Like, is that a core value? Because if it is a core value, then families are diverse. And as an example, I don't want this to be the only thing, but the church building as an example is the house for the family to gather, right?
Yep.
Well, if you have a family with like teenage boys, like things will get broken,
They
right?
stink.
Yeah, they smell, they break things. They just do. If you have a house with little kids, they're messy.
Yep.
There'll be, look, this isn't me per se, but let's just say some minister found some drawing on the communion table in Texter,
Yep.
and he looked at it and he thought, I know whose kid that was. It was probably mine. Like sometimes there'll be Texter drawn on the communion
On the
table.
doily?
On the wood. But that's another story. We don't need to talk about that anymore. But, if we actually believe it's family, right? If we if that's a value which we hold as high and value, then our whole space should reflect that. Wow. If you live in a house which has little kids, it reflects little kids. If you live in a house that has teenagers and young adults, it reflects teenagers and young adults.
Yep.
If it's just if it's just two retired people, whatever, it looks like that. So there's a reality there with some of those, just as an example. That's one way with which our values kind of bear fruit in our actions and the way we express and live our lives together.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. Guy, all of you, thank you for your engagement in this. Like, I really appreciate it. Is there any sort of last, you've got your pitch moment. Here it is. Give me your pearl of wisdom, your quotable quote that I can lay out there around engaging in ministry with young people or supporting ministry with young people. Matt?
I don't know what you can fit in a couple of seconds, but I suppose one of the things that I've learned over time is, we've talked about allowing young adults to ask questions and that kind of thing, and having space for that, but like giving them something to live into and expecting something from them.
Yeah.
I know that sounds counterintuitive in some ways. Like, we live in a culture where people kind of want to be unbound from any commitments and that kind of thing, but I think actually people feeling like they're part of something bigger than themselves, and that there's healthy expectations on them that they can achieve, that is appropriate to them. I think that's a huge thing, and often we don't want to give people responsibility, young people responsibility. We don't want to trust them with things for whatever reason, which is sad. But that's got to be a part. Some of the wisdom that I've heard over my years on this planet is, if there's somebody that maybe needs companionship, for example, don't ask them how you can help them. Ask them for help.
Wow.
And it's counterintuitive to the way we think about things. We want to do charity to people all the time, but actually one of the best things we can do is ask people to help me. You are a intelligent, capable person, and I actually need you. That's the way to pull people into community. Yeah. And I think that's the case for everyone, but young adults included.
Yeah. Thank you. Gabi?
I think it's important that if you're going to care about young people, you also need to care about what young people care about. There is so much connection between faith and justice work at Leichhardt Uniting Church. People have come to our congregation because they saw us at a protest.
Yep.
If you are deeply caring about climate action, which is a huge thing for young people, if you're deeply caring about what it means to love queer people as their full selves, a lot of young people are realising they are queer or deeply care about their friends who are queer.
Yes.
If you're taking a stand about some of these issues that are really important to young people, that's going to be something that they're attracted to.
Yep.
They're going to think, wait, I can care about that and also be formed in my faith in the same place. That's huge.
Yeah, thank you. So far, the key takeaway for me is ask people to help you to protest. So, hey, old people, get out there and get your placards running.
Get arrested.
Yeah. What do we get to add to that?
I can help you with that.
Yeah, not much. Look, my only 2 cents is this. It's like sometimes young adults ministry particularly falls in the hole between youth and families. It's like you're a youth group kid And then it's like, well, come back when you got a kid, like come back when you're having families. And we're not strategic about it, which is a shame, but also to our own detriment.
Yes.
And perhaps we are bearing the fruit of that past, of not being intentional about our young adults ministry. But I think it's one of the most vibrant areas of ministry in our church. And for me, there is few better places to spend our energy, to spend our missional dollars on that kind of youth, young adult demographic particularly. And it'll be messy and things will get broken, but it'll be worth it.
So invite them to a messy protest.
With a hammer to
Great.
break a window.
To break a window.
Yeah, the stained glass one, preferably.
Great. Let's action the fact that there's no affordable housing, so we need to take to like Mossman and to the North Shore and let's not even talk about that. Friends, thank you so much for engaging in this podcast that's about to become anarchic, and hello to police that are listening right now. Coming up very shortly within the life of our young adult ministry within Pulse, our first young adult gathering is happening for the year. Now, we ran them last year. Lots of young adults and their people who care about them came along. That was great. I can't say where it is because we haven't confirmed it yet, but it will be on Saturday the 3rd of June. So keep an eye on all of the Pulse socials. That's going to be the best way to find out where it's happening, but definitely it is happening on Saturday the 3rd of June. Young Adults Gathering, YAG as we like to call it. It would be great to see you there. If you're a young adult or you love young adults, have young adults in your community, encourage them to come along. We would love them to be a part of it. They can help us by being there.
Pittwater will be there.
Nice. Represent. I'm sure we'll drag in some like-hearted people as well. That'll be phenomenal. If you want to find out or keep in touch with what's happening within the life of Pulse, you can email us at contact-pulse@nswact.uca.org.au. Just listen back. I'm not going to say it again. Or at UCA Pulse on Instagram, on TikTok, and we are pulse.uca.org.au on the web, so you can read about stuff. We will, of course, promote YAG there and all of the other things that are happening. We'd also love to know what you think. Be in touch. Tell us about, hey, I heard this, Gabi said something that really excited me, or Paul said something that I disagree with, or Matt, who even is he? We would love to hear that stuff, and we would love to engage with you about that. So reach out, and we can even connect you with these guys because they are absolutely keen to talk with you about why they are passionate about young adult ministry. And that's in part what Pulse is about. We love these people and we want to encourage them in their ministry, and none of them are silos. They are all wanting to grow God's kingdom. That's what we're about, and we'd love to be a part of it with you. So please do reach out. Don't forget to subscribe, smash the like button at the bottom of this video. That's what the kids tell me I have to say. And of course, you're tuned in to the #1 youth ministry podcast within the life of the Uniting Church in Australia. So great to be with you. Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.